In this section, we're going to update our config files for the multi-server and the multi-worker and add all these different environment variables. Again, we're going to leave off the PG password for right now. We're not going to worry about that one just yet. We're going to come back to it at the very end. All right, so we're going to first open up our multi-worker config file, the deployment for it, and we're going to add in a little bit of configuration to that. So inside my code editor, I'll find the worker deployment file. Then inside of here, I'm going to scroll down to the pod template. So here's my template section. I'm then going to find the container definition, and we're going to add on a set of environment variables that are going to be passed into this container when it is created inside of the pod. And so on the container definition, I'll add on an env key. Env is short for environment variables. We're going to designate a couple here. So env is going to receive an array. So I'm going to put in a dash like so. Then for every entry inside this array, we're going to have a name and a value property. And I bet you can guess what these are going to do. Name is going to be the name of the environment variable, and then value is going to be the value for it. So for our first named environment variable that we're going to pass into the worker, we'll pass in our Redis host. And again, this is going to be some type of reference telling our multi-worker container how it can reach out and connect to Redis. So what we want to put in here is the name of the cluster IP service that the worker needs to connect to get at the Redis pod. And again, in this case, it's going to be Redis cluster IP service, because that's what we provided as the name for that cluster when we put it together, or that cluster IP, when we put it together inside of our Redis cluster IP service file. So this is the string right here. That's what we care about. So for the value, I will put in Redis cluster IP service. And then next up, we're going to also designate the Redis port. The port value here is going to be 6379. That is the default value for the Redis connection port. It's also what we wired up inside of our Redis cluster IP service as both the opening port and the target port in there as well. So this, again, is going to be a hard-coded value. We're just going to throw it directly in here as 6379, like so. Okay, so that's it for the worker deployment. It's all the environment configuration we need. So I'm going to close that file. And then we're going to also open up our, where is it? The server deployment right there as well. So in the server deployment, we're going to add in a set of environment variables to the server. So I'm going to find the server container configuration. And inside of here, we're going to do our env block as well. Now this one's going to have significantly greater number of environment variables. So we're going to do a little bit of typing here. Let's see. We'll start off first with a name of Redis host. The value, again, is going to be the name of our Redis cluster IP service, which was Redis cluster IP service. We'll do another array entry. So notice how I put another dash right here. This is going to be our Redis port. We'll have a value of 6379 over here as well. Next up, we'll do our PG user. So this is going to be the default username for Postgres. And we just use the default of Postgres, which is technically not good form, not the best way to make use of Postgres here, but totally fine for our purposes. Next up, we'll do our PG host. So the PG host is the connection string. We're essentially telling multi-server how to reach out to our Postgres instance. And so very similar to what we just did with Redis, we're going to do the same thing with Postgres as well. We're going to provide the name of the cluster IP service that is managing access to the Postgres pod. So I'm going to open up the Postgres cluster IP service config file right here. I'll find the name, and that's going to be the host name that we want to attempt to connect to get access to that database. So for my PG host, I'm going to put in Postgres cluster IP service like so. All right, so what do we have next? I think we have our PG port. The value for that, we are using the default of 5432. No changes there. Remember, we also set up our Postgres cluster IP service to make that port available. And I think probably the last one, actually, I think we got two more here. What do we have? I just want to double check the diagram and make sure I'm not missing any in here. So we got the port, I think it's the database, right? Yeah. All right, so we're going to do our PG database. And again, we are using the default Postgres database of Postgres. Again, very much like the PG user, using the default database, not quite the best way of doing things, but for our purposes, it is good enough. All right, so I think that's it in terms of the initial set of environment variables. So let's take a quick pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to talk a little bit more about the PG password, and we're going to make sure that when we put this into a config file, we are not writing out the password in plain text. We're going to make sure that we store it in a much more secure fashion. So quick pause, and we'll take care of that in the next video.